Hey there, ICC members and friends. Welcome to the third candidates recap video. With only 4 rounds to go, the excitement is at its peak. 6 of the 8 players can still make a run for the title. Only 1 point separates the first from the last. Gukesh and Nepomniachtchi are still in the lead with 6 points. But Pragnananda, Nakamura and Karuana, both of these last two with a comeback win yesterday, are only 1 point behind them. Only half a point behind them actually, with 5.5. Even Vidit, the Indian player, is on 5 and still has a chance. In the 10th round, yesterday, the game between the two leaders, Gukesh and Nepomniachtchi, they played it very solidly. It was a Coachio Lopez, and the game ended in a draw. But meanwhile, the two Americans, Nakamura and Karuana, they had a must-win scenario, and they were able to overcome the tail-enders, Abazov and Alireza, in 2 really up-and-down games that might have gone any way. Any result was possible there. However, although the excitement is coming from the chess, it's the French former Iranian player Alireza Firouzja who's been hitting the news with his protests, his claims, the Shoegate claim against the main arbiter. He claimed that the arbiter disturbed his thought when he was making some noise with his shoes in the refreshment area. Was that enough to be able to disturb his thoughts, or is this just a bit of drama? Who knows? But also his father is making a claim to fame. He threatens to call the police if the organisers don't allow him into the venue as a spectator for the full game. Now, of course, family and coaches, team members can't be in the same venue as the players. It's just too difficult to control everything that can happen there. This does have a certain parallelism with Gatakamsky and his father many years ago. The protective father making the news while the player is trying to focus on the games. That didn't play out very well for sure. In the women's candidates, it's a Chinese affair. Lei Ting Li has won 4 out of her last 5 games and now ties for first place with Tang Zhongji. They have 6.5 out of 10. Goryachkina and Lakhno are right behind with 1 point less on 5.5. There's 4 games left. It's hard to see one of them going and overtaking the 2 Chinese player, but everything can happen still in the Chinese. Now, I've selected 5 moments and positions of interest from these last 3 rounds. I hope you enjoy them with me and get to learn some chess and enjoy what's happening in Toronto. Let's go with the first position. So this happened yesterday. This is the game between Karuana and Firouzja. In this position, Karuana played knight to b3, allowing Alireza to sacrifice his queen for the bishop. And afterwards pin Karuana's queen to get the material back. Now obviously Karuana had foreseen this option and had it under control. He played h4, protecting the queen, with the idea that after bishop takes g5, pawn takes g5, and now for example knight to h7, he was thinking of playing pawn to f4, protecting the pawn with a decent position. But after bishop g4, I think black is more or less fine here. However, Firouzja wanted to play it in a tricky way. Before recovering the queen, he played bishop to e6. And actually this went well for him because he was able to recover the queen further on and had an equal position, although ultimately he lost the game. But here, neither of the two players saw a very nice tactical trick, a very nice pattern which everyone can learn from. Karuana could have played bishop takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, and now pawn to e5. This is a very interesting move, a very spectacular move. The main point is that knight takes e5, which would be the normal move, now will lose because white will play pawn to f4, hitting the knight and also, more importantly, blocking off the pin so that if the knight moves, white can retreat his queen back to g3. Of course, black would have to capture the queen now, but retaking hits the two knights, so white would end up with an extra piece. This is the main point, and other lines also work well for Karuana. In the press conference, actually, when this was shown to both players, Alireza said that this was losing for him. If Karuana had spotted the move bishop takes e6, pawn takes e6, and especially the move e5. So I thought this was quite a nice tactic, which is something to remember. And more importantly, when you have to recover the queen after sacrificing your own, it's probably best to recapture it as soon as possible. You never know down the line what might happen. Let's go to see our second position. One of the reasons that Gukesh is leading the tournament is that he's performing very well when he has his opportunities. In this game, in the 8th round, he took on with black his compatriot Vidit Santos Gurati. Now, in the position of the diagram, although material is equal, it does seem that black has the upper hand. His rook and his queen are very active, and his pawn structure is slightly better than white's. However, with a move, for example, such as queen to c2, just keeping a hold on the position, it's hard to see how black can win, at least very quickly. But Vidit, for some reason, miscalculated and went for c5, which is a very risky move. He's sacrificing a pawn. I do think this was a miscalculation. After b takes c5, knight to c4, it does have some threats like pawn takes pawn, like rook to b2. Maybe Vidit was counting on Gukesh playing queen takes b5. And now I've calculated this line. And this line actually does seem to be quite good for him. Check. And queen c3 hitting the two pieces. And actually here, I do think white has very good chances to get the win. But instead of playing queen takes b5, which would have been a mistake, Gukesh played queen to e1, hitting the rook, but more importantly, closing in on white's king. Rook to e2, queen to g1, and the king has to come out, which is always very risky, and black goes for the kill, bringing the other knight to the attack. Now g5, mate, is the threat, so Vidit had to sacrifice his knight. I don't think that when he played c5, Vidit had calculated that his king would be on h4. I think this is just part of the sequence of miscalculation. Now he's playing forced moves. Now, of course, black could have captured the knight, and I think everything is okay. But instead of that, he played queen to h2, threatening queen to g3, mate. The knight came back, and now he brought the rook to f1. Now he's threatening rook takes f5, followed by the mate with queen to g3. Very precise, concrete, and good play by Gukesh. g4, but the sacrifice comes at the same time. Doesn't matter, his queen is in prise, because if the queen is captured, g5 is checkmate. So Vidit had to play pawn takes rook, and now queen to g3, knight to h7, and Vidit had to resign, as after king takes knight, queen takes a3 is checkmate. Now, this is the level of play Gukesh is bringing to the table in this tournament. So clearly he has a very good chance at winning the event and taking on Ding Liren in the final. As I mentioned before in the preview, Nakamura is making a comeback in the candidates. In the last 3 rounds, he scored 2 wins and 1 loss, which is +1, quite a good score. The main victory was his win against Fabiano Caruana. Now, I didn't know this, but it seems that Nakamura has defeated Fabiano in his last 4 classical games. Now, when you start losing regularly against another opponent, this can become sort of paranoia, and you start becoming affected by when you have to play against this same player. So in this position, everyone can see that white does have an isolated pawn, but all white's pieces are very aggressively situated, heading towards the center and the king side. Karuana should have played queen to b6 in this position and bringing the rook to d8. I think the game would be very tactical after knight to h5. Take, 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 take. There's a pin, and it does seem that eventually black will have some compensation for the exchange. It's still tricky, and the computer does give an advantage for white here, but this was the way to go. Instead of that, Caruana just wanted to simplify the position with bishop to d7, but this is a mistake. Rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, and now, as all of black pieces are on the first rank, Nakamura goes in for the kill. He's threatening to sacrifice the knight on h6 and bring the rook in to attack the black king. Now, Nakamura is a very strong attacking player. For example, if bishop to d7, there's a nice sacrifice here, a piece for 2 pawns, the looming threat of a mate on h7 if the knight moves. The pawn on h5 doesn't allow the defense, knight to g6, and when the rook swings over to g3, black is essentially dead. Fabiano played queen to f6, trying to stop that threat, but now black's queen came in to b4, hitting the pawn on b7, but also threatening a deadly tactic on e7. And this is what happened in the game. Fabiano blundered with b5, check, and I have to think that he missed knight to d5, attacking the queen and attacking the checkmate on f8. He resigned. If he had spotted the knight to d5, I'm sure he would have played bishop to d7. In this case, there is a forced line. Queen takes b7, bishop takes f5, queen takes rook, bishop takes c2, and rook e8. Now the thing is, black does have 2 pieces for the rook, but the knight is pinned on the rank. So in this type of situation, black can hardly think of winning. The thing is, can white increase his advantage? I think he can. Rook to c8, and now not rook to c6, because queen takes d4, and black might find a perpetual check here. But instead, queen to b8, exchanging the queens. And this position is still very hard to defend, because one of these 2 pawns is going to fall, and white will have a passed pawn on the queen side. Now typically rook and a passed pawn against 2 pieces is good for the rook and the pawn. So something like this. Although the game is still open, the h6 pawn will probably fall. The king will go to d4. We have an extra passed pawn on the queen side. This is most probably a win for white. As you all know, I like to focus as well on 1 or 2 of the games of the women's candidates. Now, in this position, this was a critical moment of the game of the 10th round, which could easily decide the winner of the women's candidates. Goryachkina was playing with white, and Lei Tingli from China, who has won 4 of her last 5 games, was playing with black. Now the position should end in a draw. Goryachkina does have an extra piece, but Lei Tingli tries her last chance. she's just played f5 with the idea that Goryachkina should capture pawn takes pawn. And after that, one of the next two variations could occur. If king takes pawn, we go for the b4 pawn. And we get to c2 just in time to stop the e pawn going to queen. Alternatively, instead of king takes pawn, Lei Tingli could have advanced her pawn anyway. In this case, we go f6, check, and use the check to get to the b pawn. And the game is a draw in any case. So this game should have ended in a draw. However, Goryachkina blundered, unknowingly obviously, and played knight takes e5. And there is a difference. Of course, if Lei Tingli just captures the pawn, we'll get to the same position as the ones we've seen before. The knight drops back to stop the pawn. But black played king to f4, hitting the pawn and the knight. And now, if pawn takes pawn, she can capture the knight, capture the pawn, and you have to remember that if white captures the pawn, which is behind, the pawn in front always promotes. So black would win this position. That's why Goryachkina played knight to d3. But now, after king takes pawn, the pawn is further away from the knight. It's one file away. And this makes a big difference because now the king is making a barrier to the knight. And even if the knight drops back, it can't stop the pawn getting to queen. Goryachkina went from behind, trying to get there, but there's no chance. Check, and now king to e3, the game is over. So, I hope you enjoyed this recap. We've seen a few interesting positions. We've talked a bit about the situation. I'll leave you with the scoring tables, which our editor will for sure put for you. And you can see that things are really, really interesting. Today's a rest day. There's 2 games left. We'll do another recap and then the 2 final rounds. Who will decide who is going to go on and play Ding Liren for the title? Everyone says that normally you win the candidates with 8.5 out of 14. That's +3. But it seems to me, with so many players tied at the top, this could easily end with a tie and we'll have to go to the tie breaks, which will be fun. See you soon, and thanks for watching.